I'm Ralph Preston, and William Lowe and I are back to do another roadmap segment. And tonight we're going to talk about a problem that William sees a lot in the people that he coaches, and I see it a lot in people that I work with, and also in all of the Facebook groups. And that's how to get your hands started, how to open up or relax a balled up fist. So, William, I know you had some thoughts on this in terms of the people that you see and a strategy um, for relaxing the fist. So, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think that this topic is this is more or less the holy grail in stroke recovery. And I think the discussion that Ralph and I are going to have tonight, it's more of a PSA or public service announcement for all stroke survivors, because it's really going to provide the folks watching this who are in this situation with some insight into, how to actually how to get out of a situation where maybe your hand might be balled up in a fist all the time. And even though you've tried as hard as you can, the fingers can't seem to relax and open up in a more natural open position where you're able to walk around and your hand is a lot more loose like it used to before you had your stroke. So the reason why this happens is because in recovery after stroke, the way to actually get your fingers into a more relaxed position so that they're not curled in and so that your hand is not balled up in the fist all the time is to actually work on teaching your brain how to actually relax the flexors. So in a lot of stroke survivors which I've met and exchanged notes with since I had my stroke, and also in my journey as a stroke survivor coach, what I've noticed is that a lot of stroke survivors are in this situation where their hand is balled up in a fist, and they keep working on teaching. They keep working on the extensors through exercises such as electrical stimulation. But even though they're working on the extensors, they find that a couple months in, their hand is still balled up in the fist. And the reason why this happens is because naturally, the muscles which you use to flex your fingers or your flexors, they're 9 times stronger, I believe, as Ralph mentioned to me before we did this discussion, than your extensors. So even if you're working on the extensors or the muscles which you use to open your fingers, the reason why your hand is still balled up in a fist is because your extensors are still trying to overcome that resistance, which is caused by the muscles which you use to flex your fingers or your flexors. So the more counterintuitive and practical approach to actually teach your brain how to relax your fingers and open up your hand is to actually work on teaching your brain how to relax the flexors. So you take away that resistance and your fingers are a lot more open, which allows your finger extensors to actually have less resistance to work against and become a lot stronger so that they can actually overcome, and you can actually teach your brain how to overcome some of that resistance which is caused by the muscles which you use to flex your fingers. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that if you're serious about relaxing your fingers, and if you're serious about getting out of a situation where you're brought up in a fist into a position where your hand is more open, you're much better off, rather than working on the extensors, to work on relaxing the flexors. And then once you relax the flexors, work on any extension which your brain might have gotten back in your recovery after stroke. Because quite often in recovery after stroke, your ability to open up your fingers comes after your ability to flex your fingers. Your ability to flex your fingers comes first, naturally, because of muscle tightness and muscle spasticity. But in order to actually get some opening, you also have to have a little bit of flexion first as well, because extension or opening up your hand is just basically the result of relaxing your flexors or relaxing your fingers. So I know earlier, before we started recording, Ralph, you and we had a discussion about this, and you had some ideas, and you had some experiences around some things which you've seen stroke survivors do where they've worked their flexors too much with things like therapy, which have resulted in not so desirable outcomes. You had some thoughts on this, on how it relates to, obviously working your extensors. I was just wondering, did you want to share your experiences and your thoughts on this topic with the folks watching?
Sure. Well, you mentioned putty, and putty has some uses. Mostly, I use it later on in my recovery. I found that if I squeezed putty a lot, it worked. I didn't know anything about flexors, extensors. I just noticed that if I squeezed putty a bunch, that it tended to make my hand tight. I also noticed that if I buried my fingers into it, I couldn't open my hand because they were actually stuck to the putty. I suggest to people that they not use putty until they are pretty good at opening their hand. And like you mentioned when we were talking before we started recording, William, once they can open their hand, they may as well use it for everything as a way to work both the flexors and the extensors. So I didn't know much about, I don't think I knew about flexors and extensors till about, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, and I'm 15 years in. So half of my stroke, until I started coaching people and trying to learn it all that I could so I could pass on good information, was when I first learned about this. I also met a friend of mine who's in OT, who taught me a good bit. But I did, my typical approach was to pay attention to what I was doing and try and figure out a way to overcome the things that weren't working right. So one of the things that I did was I couldn't hold on to anything, even though my hand was fairly tight. First thing I did was I used a lot of passive movement to open up my hand to get those extensors at least into a normal open position and stretched out. I saw a couple of splints early on in the rehab hospital, but I never had one from my OT, never made one. So one thing I did was once I got my hand opened up, I would then place it on the table, open, or on the couch arm or on my thigh. And so I kind of made my own splints when I sat around. And I didn't do much sitting around in the daytime because I was pretty busy working on getting better. Let's see, what else did I do? And another thing I did was, I guess the first thing that I noticed about not being able to let go, which is a sign that you got too much flexor and not enough extensor, or that you haven't learned to control the flexors enough to relax them, was my old friend, the plastic glass. I've done this a few times. If I didn't like the way I put it down, I would do it again and again. Well, in the beginning, a lot of times I would put it down and I couldn't let go. So I would just practice letting go. One key trick I found was learning how hard to grip it. In the beginning, you tend to do like a death grip on everything, and that is strengthening your flexors and making it more difficult to let go. Because if you can learn the right amount to grip, before our stroke, we automatically kind of know how hard to grip something to not let it slip out of your hands. And after a stroke, you kind of have to retrain the brain to what that is. So while I didn't know how to describe it that way at the point that I was doing it, and I do now, I was using like the letting go of the glass as a way to practice. And sometimes I wouldn't even pick it up again. I would just come on in and wrong way, and pick it up a little bit, just lift it off so I could practice letting go. And I'd do that literally. Some days when I went to let go of my glass or a coffee cup or whatever, it'd let go. Other days, especially in the beginning for a good while, it wouldn't. And whenever it wouldn't, I'd do 5 or 10 practices until I could get it to open. I was always a big believer on leaving a good pattern in your brain, do it until you can do a good one. And my feeling was if you do it until you can do a good one, then you're leaving your brain with the right kind of pattern. I don't know if that works. I mean, it worked for me. I don't know if I've never really verified that with a physical therapist or occupational therapist, but I bet they would agree. So those are a couple things. One more thing I did was, well, part of my walking, I walked in my driveway. At the end of my driveway was my mailbox. So every day when, after the mail came the next time I went walking laps in the driveway, I would get the mail. I found in the beginning that while I was working on loosening my grip, I found in the beginning, I typically would take like the newspaper or whatever and roll it up and have all the mail in there. And then I held it this way, not this way. So the mail could actually fall out if I didn't grip it enough. And then I practiced when I got to the front porch, because I usually kept walking. I practiced letting go and putting it down. So, I did that early on because I don't know, early on, I got involved in, using my hand and as much as I could in daily activities. Of course, you can walk out to the mailbox and pick up the mail with your unaffected hand, but that's not doing anything for you. So I always got it with my affected hand. And after a couple months, I didn't drop it and no mail fell out. And when I got it to its destination, I could let go. I suppose that's because I learned the right amount of tension to hold it in place and without putting so much force on it that when you get to the destination, it makes it more difficult to let go. So there's a balance there between having enough to hold something and not doing too much so that you're not strengthening those or not engaging those flexors to the point that you're going to have trouble relaxing them and using the extensors. So those are a couple of things I did. I know you got a couple other things to talk about, William, so I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, that's right. And I couldn't agree more with what you've said, Ralph. Especially with the therapy. The bad thing about the therapy is that if you're working on your flexors, quite often physical therapists or occupational therapists in the hospital, when you get your flexion back, at least in my experience, some might prescribe therapy because they want you to build on the flexion. And quite often this is a trap because when you're doing something such as therapy and you're working on flexing your fingers to grip it, there's no feedback in that exercise, which is telling your brain what it actually feels like to relax your fingers. And like you said, Ralph, quite often when you did the therapy, you found that your fingers got stuck to the putty. And that's no good because it doesn't teach your brain how to actually relax your fingers or relax the flexors. And like you mentioned earlier, before we had this discussion, therapy is working on your flexors. It's not teaching your flexors how to actually relax. And that's because there's no feedback from the therapy giving your brain a sense of what it feels like to actually relax the flexors. And if you're going to be doing any exercise to actually relax your flexors, you're much better off doing functional ones, doing functional exercises, or things like the 3-hole punch activity, which I came up with a long time ago, where you're able to flex down and you have something which gives your brain a little bit of a bounce back. So your brain has that, gets a little bit of feedback of what it actually feels like to actually relax your flexors so that it's exposed to the experience of what it feels like to actually open up your fingers. And as you saw with that 3-hole punch, when you come down, what you need to do in order to get that bounce back is you need to teach your brain how to switch off everything upstairs and all the signals it's sending to the flexors to actually feel what it feels like to actually relax and open up. And only then is your brain having the opportunity to work on the extensors if you have any signals going to your extensors at all. And I mean, just like Ralph said, before your stroke, your brain intuitively knows how much effort or brain power it needs to use to actually close the fingers and pick up an object in order to actually relax and drop the object after. In recovery after stroke, what tends to happen is your brain is overloaded with signals which go to your flexors. And so when you try to grip something, it becomes impossible to relax because unless your brain has obviously been exposed to what it feels like to relax your fingers. So in a functional sense, if you're serious about taking this to the next level, one thing you could do is if you're in a situation where your hand is brought up like a fist, is you could do activities just like the 3-hole punch, where you're actually allowing your brain to grip an object or close the fingers and also experience what it feels like to relax the fingers at the same time. So, for example, one exercise which I've talked a lot about is trying to test how long it takes for you to actually relax your fingers after you open a fridge door. So, for example, if you're trying to teach your brain how to relax your fingers or work on the extensors in some shape or form, what you would do is you would try gripping a fridge door because you obviously have the flexion, and then you would see you would have a look to see how long it takes for your affected hand to actually let go of the fridge door. Now, initially, when you try this, it might take you half an hour, or even an hour, for your fingers to actually eventually relax and let go of the fridge door. But over time, as you practice and you refine and you condition your brain on how much effort it needs to use to actually grip the fridge door, then you might find that time is shortened to maybe half an hour, maybe 15 minutes, and then later 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute, or even down to 30 seconds, so that it gets as close to where you were before you had your stroke. And as you can see, the common theme between activities like these is you're giving your brain the opportunity to actually relax your fingers or your flexors and give it the experience of what it feels like to relax and open up the fingers, even if it's the smallest amount possible. With a fridge door, you won't see that your fingers are naturally going to open straight away like that, but you might find that you might start with a gradual relaxation, and then after that, your brain would have developed some control to be able to actually work on flexing and also opening after at the same time. And that's because these activities give your brain that experience and exposure to what it feels like to actually relax your flexors. And as you can see, these are all completely different to exercises where you grip something like a stress ball or you grip a hand gripper 1,000,000 times. And the reason why they're different and the reason why they're effective is because when you grip something like a stress ball 1,000 times, which is something I've seen a lot of stroke survivors do, what you're doing is you're encouraging your brain to put a lot of force and effort in the gripping of the stress ball, and you're working the flexors rather than giving your brain the opportunity to actually relax the flexors and actually release the stress ball. You're much better off doing something such as obviously opening up the fridge door or picking up something like a piece of fruit and allowing the weight to actually teach your brain how to relax your flexors, or a glass of water, so that you can actually see and expose your brain to what it feels like to actually relax those flexors enough to let go of an object. And that it won't help you get to the promised land overnight, but it will move your brain in a more positive direction in terms of getting in a situation where your hand is brought up like a fist like that into a more open, relaxed position where it's going to be a lot easier to work on the extensors and strengthen these up so that they can become a lot stronger, and you can teach your brain how to overcome any resistance which is caused by the flexors in the first place. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, putty isn't all bad. You can work on extension with putty. You can make loops like rubber bands. Nowadays, they've got these 5-finger rubber bands. When I was getting better, they didn't. I used post office rubber bands. And also you can make loops with putty and use it to stretch, working on your extensors. You can also put the putty, smash it out, flat on a tabletop, put your fingers down and try and pushing out with the putty as resistance. So putty's not a bad thing. You just gotta be careful in how you use it. And speaking of something that's not a bad thing, is a good thing when you use it right, and isn't a good thing when you don't use it right, William, is e-stim. And you had some thoughts on why immediate e-stim doesn't necessarily work to help you learn how to relax your flexor muscles. So maybe you'd tell everybody about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So one common situation I see with a lot of stroke survivors who I've coached is that they they come to me with a bored up fist, and they've used electrical stimulation to contract the finger extensors so it makes their fingers come up like that. And even though they're doing this for months on end, they still find themselves in a similar situation where the hand is brought up like this. So in situations like that, you're much better off teaching your brain how to relax the flexors rather than work on the finger extensors, because like I said earlier in our discussion, even if you work on the finger extensors with your electrical stimulation, you're not teaching your brain how to overcome that resistance, any resistance which is caused by the finger flexors. Whereas if you teach your brain how to actually relax the finger flexors or work on the finger flexors with the electrical stimulation, there is a chance that you can teach your brain how to relax a grip. And that moves you a little bit closer to actually loosening up your fingers a little bit more.
Yep. Okay. Well, you also mentioned that you had a couple of exercises that you might be able to pass on to people that work on relaxing the flexor muscles. You want to share them?
Well, I mean, I would just start with functional activities where you're picking up an object, and you're obviously giving your brain the experience of what it feels like to relax it. For example, I mentioned one of them, which was picking up a piece of fruit. The weight of the fruit is actually going to allow your flexors to actually relax so that you can actually drop it. You could try something like a water bottle, something like a milk carton. You could try picking up a milk carton by the handle, walking over about a couple of yards in front of you, and trying to let go of that grip and place the milk carton in a controlled manner on something close by. That's another approach you could take as well. And you might notice that with these activities that I shared with you, you're already applying something that your brain already knows, which is the ability to flex your fingers, but you're doing an activity which exposes your brain to what it feels like to actually relax the flexors, and actually so that you're not brought up like this all the time, but rather you're going from a position where your fingers are all flexed like that, and you're encouraging your brain to control that flexion in such a way so that you can actually relax it and let go of something. And the key to obviously opening up your fingers is learning to let go first. As we mentioned at the start of this discussion, relaxing your flexors is the way to work on is the way to go if you're serious about working on your finger extensors and getting to the next stage of your recovery. So that's where I would start. It's not going to cure your situation overnight and get you from a fist to an open hand straight away, but it's definitely going to move you in the right direction. And if you're sick of your hand being in a fist like that, and then it's going to allow your fingers to get into a more neutral position where they're not like that, but they're a little bit more relaxed. So that's where I would start. And there are a number of exercises. Those are just a couple of the exercises which I would suggest, which I've known to work with, people I've helped as a stroke survivor coach as well.
Well, you're going to get a lot farther if you learn how to relax than if you do constant e-stim or squeezing of putty or stress balls. One thing I did was I saw this, there's like a open and close 10 times challenge that was going around for a while. Anyway, I did that. I noticed that I couldn't open and close my hand very fast, so I worked on it. This is my affected hand. So when I closed it, I didn't like squeeze tight like I am now. I'm not afraid to do that now. At one point, I wouldn't do that because I felt like I'd be working against it. I didn't know about all these muscles and things. I just paid attention to the tightness, and when I grip tight, I got I when I grip tight, it tended to want to stay that way. So I did a lot of this. And I'm not really, when I close, I'm not squeezing at all. I'm just working the flexors and the extensors. And I made sure you get it right to the camera that when I did it, I opened them all the way, full. So that's one thing that I did. I don't know what OTs or therapists would say about it. Actually, I did it with my OT. So I assume it's a good exercise. Um, that's probably it for this week. We did a thing on we did another roadmap on a similar subject, and I will post that one in the description underneath this one. So if you want more information on getting your hand to work again, you can watch that one as well. So William, unless you got anything else, I'm gonna thank you for your time and tell everybody we'll see them next time.
Oh no, that's all. Thank you for having me, Raf.